I'm Clara, and I'm 28 years old. My husband just threw legal documents in my face and called me trash in front of his entire family. I smiled and signed every single paper. The next day, his lawyer called him screaming about what he'd just done. But let me back up and tell you how I got here. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt completely betrayed by the people who were supposed to love you. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. 3 hours ago, I was sitting in my own living room, surrounded by David's family like some kind of intervention. His mother Margaret sat across from me, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against her Chanel purse. His father Richard stood behind the couch like a judge ready to deliver a sentence. His sister Jessica perched on the arm of David's chair, smirking like she was about to watch her favorite movie. The papers were spread across my coffee table like accusations. Transfer of assets. Relinquishment of inheritance rights. Documents that would hand over every penny my grandfather had left me to my husband's greedy hands. "This is what's best for everyone," Margaret said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "You're clearly not equipped to handle this kind of responsibility, Clara. David has the business experience to manage these assets properly." I looked around the room at these people who had welcomed me into their family 3 years ago. Back then, I thought I was so lucky to marry into the prestigious Hamilton family. David was charming, successful, everything I thought I wanted. His family seemed so sophisticated, so put together compared to my simple middle-class upbringing. How naive I was. "Sign the papers, Clara," David demanded, his voice harder than I'd ever heard it. "Stop being dramatic about this. It's just money. Just money." $23 million was just money to him. The inheritance my grandfather had worked 70 years to build, carefully saved and invested, so his granddaughter would never struggle the way he had during the Depression. Just money. "What if I don't want to?" I asked quietly. That's when David's mask finally slipped completely. He leaned forward, his face twisted with rage I'd only glimpsed in private moments. "Then you'll lose everything anyway. We have lawyers, Clara. We know about your little shopping habits, your questionable financial decisions. We can prove you're incompetent to manage this money." I almost laughed. My shopping habits? I drove a 3-year-old Honda and bought my clothes at Target. My questionable financial decisions? I donated $50,000 to charity last year and invested the rest conservatively, just like Grandpa taught me. But David wasn't finished. "Besides," he continued, "we know things about your past that you wouldn't want made public. That incident in college? The one you think nobody knows about?" My blood turned to ice. He was talking about the night I was assaulted at a fraternity party during my junior year. The night I'd reported to campus police and been ignored. The night that almost destroyed me until I found the strength to rebuild my life. David knew because I'd trusted him with that trauma during a vulnerable moment early in our marriage. Now he was weaponizing my worst memory against me. "You wouldn't," I whispered. Margaret smiled coldly. "Family protects family, dear. You're either with us or against us. And if you're against us," she shrugged elegantly. That's when I understood. This wasn't about the money. This was about power, control. They wanted to break me down until I had nothing left but dependence on their mercy. I picked up the pen, my hand surprisingly steady. "Where do I sign?" David's triumphant grin made my stomach turn. He pointed to each signature line, explaining what I was giving up like he was doing me a favor. His family watched with undisguised satisfaction as I signed away what they thought was my security, my independence, my future. "There," I said, setting down the pen. "Happy now?" "Ecstatic," Jessica murmured, already calculating her share. "I'm sure." They all left within minutes, barely containing their excitement. David kissed my forehead like nothing had changed. "You did the right thing, sweetheart, you'll see." After they were gone, I sat alone in the silence, staring at those signed documents. For a moment, I felt hollow, empty, like they'd succeeded in taking everything that mattered. Then David's phone rang. I could hear him answer in the driveway, his voice confident and victorious. But within seconds, his tone changed completely. "What do you mean?" I heard him shout. "What clause? What are you talking about?" That's when I smiled for the first time in hours. The story really started 2 years before that awful afternoon. Back when I was still naive enough to believe in fairy tales and happy endings, I met David Hamilton at a charity fundraiser for children's literacy, where I was volunteering as an event coordinator. He was there representing his family's investment firm, looking impossibly handsome in his tailored tuxedo. "You're the woman who organized this beautiful evening," he said, approaching me during the cocktail hour. His smile was warm, genuine, Everything I dreamed about in a partner. I'm David Hamilton. This is incredible work you're doing. I was 26, working at a small nonprofit, living in a studio apartment, and driving a car that made embarrassing noises. David was 30, successful, sophisticated, everything I wasn't. When he asked for my number, I almost thought he was joking. But he wasn't. He called the next day, then the next, then every day for 2 weeks until I finally agreed to dinner. Our first date was at an elegant restaurant where the maitre d' knew David by name. He was attentive, funny, interested in my work even though it paid practically nothing. I admire people who dedicate their lives to helping others, he told me over dessert. It shows real character. 3 months later, he brought me home to meet his family. The Hamilton estate sat on 5 acres in the most exclusive part of town, a sprawling colonial with perfectly manicured gardens and a circular driveway that could fit 10 cars. I felt like I was stepping into a magazine. Margaret Hamilton greeted us at the door, dressed in cream cashmere that probably cost more than my monthly salary. She was beautiful in that polished, untouchable way that money can buy. Her embrace was brief, but seemed genuine. "So, you're the young woman who's captured our David's heart," she said, leading us into a living room that looked like a museum. "He's told us so much about your charitable work." Richard Hamilton was equally impressive, tall and distinguished with silver hair and a firm handshake. Jessica was there with her husband Robert, both dressed like they'd stepped off a yacht. The conversation flowed easily, touching on current events, travel, culture. I felt accepted, welcomed, like I might actually belong in this world. Clara's grandfather owns several properties downtown, David mentioned during dinner, and I saw something flicker in Margaret's eyes. Interest? Calculation? At the time, I thought she was just being polite when she asked follow-up questions. What I didn't know was that Richard had already been researching my family's financial background for months. He'd hired a private investigator after David first mentioned my grandfather's construction business and property investments. The investigator had discovered public records showing Grandpa Joe owned more real estate than anyone realized, plus had made some surprisingly shrewd stock investments over the decades. "Commercial real estate can be quite lucrative," Richard noted during that first dinner. "Your grandfather sounds like a savvy businessman." "He worked construction his whole life," I explained. "Saved every penny and bought buildings when they were cheap. He always said real estate was the only investment that couldn't disappear overnight." "Wise man," Margaret agreed, though now I know she was calculating potential inheritance values in her head. "Family wealth is such a responsibility. I'm sure he's taught you well." After dinner, David walked me through their garden, pointing out flowers his mother had imported from Italy. The evening was perfect, magical, everything a girl from my background could want. "They love you already," he whispered, pulling me close under a flowering tree. "I can tell." 6 months later, he proposed with his grandmother's ring, a stunning Art Deco diamond that had been in the Hamilton family for generations. The wedding was everything I'd dreamed of, held at the country club with 300 guests, most of whom I'd never met. Margaret insisted on handling all the arrangements. "You're so busy with your little nonprofit," she said sweetly. "Let me take care of everything. Consider it my gift to you both." I should have seen the control for what it was, but I was so grateful to be accepted. My own parents had died in a car accident when I was 22, leaving me essentially alone in the world except for Grandpa. Having a family again, being part of something bigger than myself, felt like a miracle. The first year of marriage was blissful. David was attentive, supportive of my work, protective of our private time together. His family included me in holiday celebrations, birthday dinners, social events. I felt like I'd finally found where I belonged. Then Grandpa died suddenly of a heart attack, and everything changed. I inherited everything. Not just the downtown properties, but stocks, bonds, cash accounts, collectibles, even some mineral rights he'd acquired decades earlier. The lawyer explained that Grandpa had been far wealthier than anyone realized, quietly building a fortune while living modestly in his small house. "Your grandfather was quite specific about the inheritance structure," Jonathan Pierce had explained during the reading. "Everything goes to you personally, with certain protections in place should anyone attempt to coerce you into relinquishing control." David seemed genuinely happy for me at first. "Your grandfather obviously loved you very much," he said, holding me while I cried. "He wanted to make sure you were taken care of." But something shifted in the family dynamic almost immediately. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. Margaret would smile and ask about our assets and our financial planning. Jessica made comments about how nice it must be to never worry about money again. The pressure hadn't started yet, but I could feel the change in the air like the electricity before a storm. The pressure started slowly, so subtly that I almost didn't recognize it for what it was. About 6 months after Grandpa's death, David began bringing up financial topics during casual conversations. You know, honey, managing this kind of wealth requires expertise, he'd say while we were watching TV. Maybe we should consider consolidating everything under professional management. I have a financial advisor, I'd remind him. Mr. Pierce recommended someone excellent. But wouldn't it make more sense to use my family's firm? They've been managing the Hamilton assets for generations. They know what they're doing. When I expressed hesitation, he'd drop the subject, but it always came back up. During family dinners, Richard would casually mention market trends and investment strategies, speaking just over my head in financial jargon that made me feel stupid and uninformed. Of course, Clara wouldn't understand these complexities, Margaret would say with a patronizing smile. She's got such a good heart, but business isn't really her forte, is it? The comments grew more pointed over time. Jessica made jokes about my shopping addiction when I bought a new dress for a charity event. Margaret questioned my decision to donate money to my old nonprofit, suggesting that perhaps I should be more strategic with my giving. Wealthy families have obligations, she explained one afternoon over tea. We support the right causes, the ones that matter to people who matter. Your little literacy program is sweet, but it's not exactly making waves in the community. I began to feel guilty about every purchase, every decision, every dollar spent. They had a way of making everything seem frivolous or naive. When I wanted to set up a scholarship fund in Grandpa's name, David suggested we wait until we had a proper investment strategy in place. You don't want to waste his legacy on impulsive giving, he said reasonably. Let's be smart about this. The real manipulation began when they started questioning my mental state. If I forgot something minor, Margaret would exchange meaningful looks with David. If I seemed tired or stressed, Jessica would comment about how overwhelming it must be to handle so much responsibility. I worry about Clara sometimes, I overheard Margaret telling someone on the phone. All that money, and she's so young, so inexperienced. David's trying to help her, but she can be quite stubborn about accepting guidance. They planted seeds of doubt about my judgment, my capabilities, my right to make decisions about my own inheritance. Every conversation felt like a test I was failing. Every choice I made seemed to confirm their assessment of my inadequacy. The turning point came when I discovered David had been going through my personal papers. I found him in my home office one evening, my financial statements spread across the desk. "What are you doing?" I asked, shocked by the violation of privacy. "Just trying to understand our complete financial picture," he said without embarrassment. "We're married, Clara. What's yours is mine, legally speaking." "That's not how it works with inheritance," I said, feeling a chill run down my spine. "These are my personal accounts." His expression hardened slightly. "Are you keeping secrets from me? Is there something you don't want me to know about?" The accusation stung because it was so unfair. I'd been nothing but transparent about everything, sharing information freely because I trusted him. But somehow, he was making my discomfort about his snooping seem like evidence of my deception. "I just think there are boundaries, even in marriage," I said carefully. "Boundaries," he repeated, like the word tasted bitter. "Between husband and wife? That's interesting, Clara. What happened to, for better or worse? For richer or poorer? Or does that only apply when I'm the one with less money?" That night was the first time David made me feel like my inheritance was somehow damaging our marriage, like my financial security was threatening his masculine pride. He slept in the guest room, claiming he needed space to think about our trust issues. I lay awake wondering how protecting my grandfather's legacy had somehow become a betrayal of my husband. The next morning, Margaret called to invite me to lunch. "Just us girls," she said brightly. "I think we need to have a heart-to-heart about some things." What I didn't know was that she'd already been planning this conversation for weeks, waiting for the right moment to begin the final phase of their campaign to gain control of my inheritance. Have you ever been in a situation where people you trusted started making you doubt your own judgment? Share your experiences in the comments below, because what Margaret told me that afternoon changed everything I thought I knew about my marriage and my place in the Hamilton family. Margaret chose the restaurant. Of course. Le Bernardin. The kind of place where waiters knew your preferences before you sat down, and discretion was purchased along with overpriced wine. She arrived first, already seated at a corner table that offered privacy, and a perfect view of the entire dining room. "Darling," she said, air kissing my cheeks like we were old friends instead of increasingly tense family members. "You look tired? Are you sleeping well?" The concern felt genuine, which made what followed even more devastating. We ordered salads neither of us would eat and wine that Margaret consumed while I barely touched. "I wanted to speak with you privately because I care about you," she began, her manicured fingers wrapped around her wine glass. David is my son, but you've become like a daughter to me these past few years. I smiled, genuinely touched by what seemed like affection. That's why this conversation is so difficult, she continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I'm worried about what this money is doing to you, to your marriage, to our family. What do you mean? I asked, though I was beginning to understand. Margaret sighed dramatically. Money changes people, Clara. Even good people, even people we love. I've watched you become more distant, more suspicious. David tells me you've been secretive about your finances, excluding him from decisions that affect your shared future. I haven't been secretive, I protested. I've just been careful. Careful of what? Your own husband? Margaret's eyebrows rose in perfectly feigned surprise. Clara, dear, that's exactly what I'm talking about. This inheritance has made you paranoid, distrustful. You're creating problems where none exist. She leaned forward, her expression earnest. David loves you desperately. He's trying to help, to protect you from making mistakes that could cost you everything. But instead of appreciating his expertise, you're treating him like an enemy. The words stung because they contained just enough truth to seem reasonable. I had been more cautious, more protective of my financial independence. But was that really such a terrible thing? Think about it logically, Margaret continued. David has a Harvard MBA and 15 years of investment experience. You have a liberal arts degree and worked for a nonprofit that barely kept its doors open. Who is better qualified to manage significant assets? It's not about qualifications, I said weakly. It's about autonomy. Margaret actually laughed. A sound like crystal breaking. Autonomy? In a marriage? Clara, that's the most selfish thing I've ever heard. Marriage is about partnership, about making decisions together for the good of the family. She signaled for another glass of wine, letting her words sink in while I processed the guilt she was systematically layering onto my shoulders. There's something else, she said quietly. Something David didn't want me to tell you, but I think you need to know. My stomach tightened with dread. People are talking, she whispered. At the country club, at social events. They're saying things about your behavior since the inheritance, about how you've changed, become cold and calculating. Some are wondering if you married David for his family connections, knowing you were about to come into money. That's ridiculous, I gasped. I had no idea about the inheritance when we got married. Of course not, Margaret soothed. I know that. David knows that. But appearances matter, darling. And right now, you appear to be a gold digger who got lucky and is now cutting her husband out of the financial success she brought to the marriage. The manipulation was masterful. She was making me responsible not just for my own choices, but for other people's perceptions, for David's reputation, for the family's social standing. What do you want me to do? I asked, feeling defeated. Nothing dramatic, Margaret assured me. Just let David help. Sign power of attorney documents so he can manage the assets professionally. Set up trust structures that protect the money while giving him the authority to make day-to-day decisions. Show the world that you trust your husband, that you're a team. Power of attorney means giving up control, I said. It means giving up the burden, she corrected. Clara, you're 28 years old. You should be focused on starting a family, building a home, enjoying your marriage. Instead, you're stressed about portfolio management and tax implications. That's no way to live. Starting a family? The phrase hit me like a physical blow because David and I had been trying to get pregnant for months without success. Margaret knew this, of course. She knew everything that mattered in our lives. Imagine how much easier everything would be, she continued, if you could just trust David to handle these things. You could go back to your charity work, maybe start that family you've been wanting. Leave the complicated financial decisions to someone with the expertise to make them properly. By the time lunch ended, I felt like I'd been emotionally beaten with a velvet hammer. Margaret hugged me goodbye, whispering, "Think about what I've said, darling. For David's sake, if not your own." I drove home in a daze, questioning everything I'd believed about my marriage, my inheritance, my right to make my own decisions. When David found me crying in our bedroom, he held me tenderly, asking what was wrong. "Your mother thinks I should give you power of attorney," I admitted through tears. "Only if that's what you want," he said softly. "I'd never pressure you about something so important." But the pressure was already there, built into every conversation, every family gathering, every interaction with the people I'd trusted to love me unconditionally. I was drowning in their expectations, and they were the only ones offering to throw me a rope. That night, David made love to me with a tenderness I hadn't felt in months. whispering promises about our future together, about the children we'd have, about growing old together in the Hamilton family legacy. I almost signed the papers the next morning. Almost. I would have signed those power of attorney documents if not for a conversation that changed everything. It happened 3 days after my lunch with Margaret, during what should have been a routine appointment with my grandfather's lawyer, Jonathan Pierce. "Mrs. Hamilton," he said after we'd finished reviewing some estate paperwork, "I hope you don't mind me asking, but is anyone pressuring you about your inheritance?" The question caught me off guard. "Why do you ask?" "Your grandfather left very specific instructions with me. He was concerned about certain possibilities. He wanted me to monitor for any signs that someone might try to coerce you into signing away control of your assets." I stared at him, suddenly alert. "What kind of instructions?" Mr. Pierce pulled out a thick file I'd never seen before. "Your grandfather was a very careful man, Mrs. Hamilton. When he learned about your engagement to David Hamilton, he did some research into the family's financial situation." "What kind of research?" "The kind that revealed the Hamilton investment group was heavily leveraged and facing significant losses from bad investments. The kind that showed your husband's family was in desperate need of capital infusion." The room felt like it was spinning. "He knew about their financial problems?" "More than that. He anticipated that they might approach you about your inheritance. That's why he built certain protections into your inheritance structure." Mr. Pierce opened the file and showed me documents I'd never seen before. Financial reports on the Hamilton family business, credit histories showing mounting debts, and most shocking of all, a private investigator's report detailing their extravagant lifestyle funded by increasingly risky investments. "Your grandfather hired investigators?" I asked, stunned. "He wanted to make sure you had all the information you needed to protect yourself. He also discovered some other troubling information about your husband." My hands trembled as Mr. Pierce handed me a manila envelope. Inside were photographs of David with another woman, taken at various locations over the past several months. Hotel receipts, restaurant bills, phone records showing hundreds of calls and texts. "Her name is Amanda Richardson," Mr. Pierce said quietly. "She works at the Hamilton family firm. The relationship has been ongoing for approximately 7 months. 7 months. While I'd been struggling with infertility treatments and blaming myself for our inability to conceive, David had been having an affair with a co-worker. There's more," Mr. Pierce continued. "Your grandfather suspected that if financial pressure didn't work, the family might attempt more direct coercion. He left specific instructions about what to do if you ever felt threatened or manipulated." He handed me another document, this one bearing my grandfather's seal and signature. "If anyone attempts to pressure you into signing away control of your inheritance through threats, manipulation, or false pretenses, this document authorizes immediate legal action. It also voids any spousal property rights and triggers a clause in your prenuptial agreement that protects your assets from any claims." "We didn't have a prenuptial agreement," I said, confused. "Actually, you did. Your grandfather insisted on it before the wedding. David signed it as a condition of receiving a substantial wedding gift from your grandfather. The agreement includes specific provisions about infidelity and financial coercion that would void any claims to your inheritance." I sat in that office for 2 hours, reading every document, studying every photograph, understanding the full scope of how completely I'd been manipulated. The evidence was overwhelming and devastating. But what struck me most was my grandfather's foresight. Even facing his own mortality, he'd been protecting me from dangers I couldn't have imagined. "What should I do?" I asked finally. "That's entirely up to you, Mrs. Hamilton. But I would suggest you be very careful about signing any documents related to your inheritance. And if you do decide to sign anything, make sure you understand exactly what you're agreeing to." When I drove home that evening, I felt like I was seeing my marriage and my in-laws with completely new eyes. Every conversation, every suggestion, every family gathering had been calculated to move me toward this moment when I'd willingly hand over control of my inheritance. David was waiting anxiously when I got home, still pushing for me to sign the power of attorney papers. "Did you have time to think about what we discussed?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. I looked at my husband, this man I'd thought I knew, and saw a stranger wearing a familiar face. "Yes," I said quietly. "I've thought about it a lot. And I think we should call your family together. If I'm going to sign away control of my inheritance, everyone should be there to witness it." "Make it official." David's smile was triumphant and predatory. "That's my girl. I knew you'd make the right choice." That night, while David slept peacefully next to me, probably dreaming about his family's financial salvation, I lay awake planning exactly how I was going to use their own greed against them. The family meeting was scheduled for Sunday afternoon at our house. I spent the week preparing meticulously, playing the part of the compliant wife who had finally seen reason. David was practically glowing with anticipation, treating me with a tenderness that would have been touching if I hadn't known it was completely fake. "You're doing the right thing, sweetheart," he kept saying. "You'll see how much easier everything becomes once the professionals are handling the complicated stuff." Margaret called daily to check on the arrangements, making suggestions about catering and flowers as if we were planning a celebration, rather than what she thought would be my financial surrender. "I'm so proud of you for putting family first," she gushed during one call. "David was so worried about the stress this was putting on you. I played my role perfectly, expressing relief about giving up the burden of managing my inheritance and excitement about focusing on more important things like starting a family. The performance made me sick, but it was necessary for what I had planned. On Saturday, I made one final visit to Mr. Pierce's office. He had prepared additional documentation that would ensure everything was legally airtight, including a detailed recording device that would capture everything said during the meeting. "Are you sure you want to do this, Mrs. Hamilton?" Mr. Pierce asked. "Once you set this in motion, there's no going back." "They made their choice when they decided to treat me like a walking dollar sign," I replied. "Now they get to live with the consequences." Sunday arrived with perfect weather. Sunshine streaming through our windows like nature was highlighting the stage for the final act. I dressed carefully in a navy blue dress that David had complimented before, wanting to look composed and rational for what was about to unfold. The Hamilton family arrived promptly at 2 o'clock, all of them dressed for the occasion like they were attending a board meeting. Margaret brought champagne, Jessica carried flowers, and Richard had his briefcase full of legal documents. "This is such a wonderful day," Margaret announced, kissing my cheek with what I now recognized as pure greed, disguised as affection. Family taking care of family. We gathered in the living room, the same space where David had first pressured me weeks before. David sat beside me on the couch, his hand resting possessively on my knee. His parents took the chairs across from us, while Jessica and Robert flanked them like supporting actors in a well-rehearsed play. "Before we begin," Richard said, opening his briefcase, "I want to express how proud we are of Clara for making this mature decision. Managing significant wealth is a tremendous responsibility, and recognizing when you need help is a sign of wisdom, not weakness." "Absolutely," Margaret agreed. "And Clara, darling, you should know that we've already been in touch with our wealth management team. They've prepared some preliminary investment strategies that will maximize your returns while minimizing your tax burden. They'd been planning how to spend my money before I'd even agreed to give it to them." The casual presumption was breathtaking. "I appreciate everyone being here," I said, standing up slowly. "This decision has been weighing on me for weeks, and I wanted my whole family present when I made it official." David squeezed my hand encouragingly. "Take your time, honey." I walked over to the side table where I'd placed several manila folders earlier. "Before I sign anything, though, I think everyone should understand exactly what we're discussing." "What do you mean?" Jessica asked, a note of uncertainty creeping into her voice. I opened the first folder and pulled out the financial reports on the Hamilton family business. "I mean that I know the real reason you want control of my inheritance." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees instantly. "Richard, your investment firm is 3 months away from bankruptcy. You've been using client funds to cover operational costs, which is not just unethical, it's illegal." I placed the documents on the coffee table where everyone could see them. Richard's face went white. "Where did you get those?" "Margaret, you've been lying to the country club about your financial situation for years. Your membership is in arrears, and you've been using your jewelry as collateral for personal loans." More documents joined the first stack. Margaret started to stand, but I held up my hand. "I'm not finished." "Jessica, your boutique is failing. You owe over $200,000 to creditors and suppliers. Robert, your gambling debts are approaching 6 figures. The room was completely silent except for the sound of papers rustling as I continued building my evidence pile. "And David," I said, turning to my husband with a smile that felt like broken glass, "you've been having an affair with Amanda Richardson for 7 months. Hotel receipts, phone records, photographs, everything's here." David jumped up, his face cycling through shock, denial, and finally rage. "Clara, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I interrupted. "Your family has been planning to steal my inheritance since before we got married. You've been cheating on me while manipulating me into trusting you with my financial future." I pulled out my grandfather's prenuptial agreement and read key passages aloud, watching their faces crumble as the full scope of their exposure became clear. "So yes," I said, reaching for a pen, "I'm absolutely going to sign these power of attorney documents. Right now, in front of all of you. David looked confused but hopeful. Clara, we can explain everything. You don't need to explain anything, I said, signing each document with flourish. Because what you don't know is that my grandfather's prenuptial agreement has a very specific clause about financial coercion and infidelity. I handed the signed papers to Richard, who took them with trembling hands. Congratulations, I said brightly. By pressuring me to sign these documents after committing adultery, David just voided any spousal claims to my assets. The coercion clause means that all of you forfeit any potential inheritance rights, and the infidelity clause triggers immediate divorce proceedings with no alimony. The silence stretched for several heartbeats before David finally understood what had happened. You can't do this, he whispered. I smiled at him, feeling genuinely happy for the first time in months. Already did. And David, pack your things. All of you need to leave my house now. That's when David called me trash and threw the papers in my face. But I just smiled and waited for his lawyer to call him the next day. You have no idea what you've just done, I said calmly, but you're about to find out. David's lawyer called him at 8:30 the next morning, and I could hear every word from the kitchen where I was calmly eating breakfast and listening to my husband's world collapse over the phone. David, what the hell did you do yesterday? Bradley Morrison's voice was loud enough to carry across the room. I just reviewed the documents you had Clara sign, and you've triggered every protection clause in her prenuptial agreement. What protection clauses? David asked, though his voice already sounded defeated. The ones that void your spousal property rights if you coerce her into signing away her inheritance while committing adultery. David, she has photographs, hotel receipts, phone records, and you pressured her to sign financial documents in front of witnesses while conducting an extramarital affair. I sipped my coffee and watched David's face cycle through confusion, realization, and finally despair. There has to be something we can do, he said desperately. Like what? Challenge a prenuptial agreement you signed voluntarily? Contest evidence that's been professionally documented? David, you've lost any legal claim to her assets, and the adultery clause means no alimony in the divorce. I didn't know about any clauses. That's because you didn't read what you signed 3 years ago. You were so focused on the wedding gift her grandfather provided that you didn't bother to understand the legal implications. After David hung up, he turned to me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, not pleading, but something approaching genuine devastation. Clara, please, we can work through this. I made mistakes, but I love you. You love my money, I corrected. There's a difference. That's not true. Yes, the financial situation got complicated, but my feelings for you are real. I studied his face, looking for any trace of the man I'd married. David, you've been cheating on me for 7 months while manipulating me into signing away my inheritance. Which part of that suggests real feelings? The affair was... Amanda was a mistake. A moment of weakness when I was stressed about the family business. 7 months is not a moment, David. It's a relationship. He slumped into a kitchen chair, suddenly looking older than his 31 years. What happens now? Now you move out. The divorce papers will be filed this week, and you figure out how to explain to your family that their financial salvation plan just became their complete ruin. My parents will lose everything. The business, the house, their social standing. You're destroying people who cared about you. I almost laughed at his audacity. I'm not destroying anyone, David. You destroyed yourselves the moment you decided to steal from me. I'm just making sure there are consequences for your choices. 2 hours later, Margaret called, her voice strained but still attempting that maternal tone she'd perfected over the years. Clara, darling, we need to talk. There are things you don't understand about our family situation. I understand perfectly, I replied. You're broke, desperate, and got caught trying to steal from your son's wife. It's not that simple. The business troubles are temporary. We just needed some liquidity to get through a rough patch. $23 million is quite a rough patch. Clara, please. David loves you. This whole thing got out of hand, but it started from a place of wanting to protect you. Even caught red-handed, she was still trying to manipulate me. Margaret, do you remember when we first met? You asked about my family background, seemed so interested in Grandpa's investment philosophy. You weren't making conversation. You were gathering intelligence. The conversation continued for another 15 minutes, with Margaret alternating between apologies, explanations, and thinly veiled threats. When she finally hung up, I felt oddly sorry for her. Desperation makes people do terrible things. But my sympathy didn't extend to forgiveness. That afternoon, I had a visitor I wasn't expecting. Amanda Richardson stood on my doorstep, looking exactly like the woman from the private investigator's photographs. Blonde, polished, professional, everything David probably thought he deserved. I suppose you hate me, she said without preamble. I don't think about you enough to hate you, I replied honestly, but I'm curious why you're here. David told me you knew about us. Among other things. Amanda looked uncomfortable, shifting her designer purse from one shoulder to the other. I didn't know he was married when we started seeing each other. When did you find out? 4 months ago. By then, I was... She paused, her hand moving instinctively to her stomach. And there it was. The final complication I should have expected. Congratulations, I said dryly. When are you due? February. Amanda's composure cracked slightly. David says he's going to leave you, that he's been planning it for months. He said the marriage was a mistake, that you two were never compatible. I actually felt bad for her in that moment. Amanda was about to learn what I'd just discovered, that David Hamilton was exceptionally good at telling people what they wanted to hear. Can I give you some advice? I asked. She nodded. Get a paternity test. And a good lawyer. David's family is broke. He's about to be unemployed and divorced, and he has a history of making promises he can't keep. Amanda left looking considerably more worried than when she'd arrived. What do you think will happen next? Will David try to fight back? Or will he accept defeat? Drop your predictions in the comments below. You won't believe what he actually did. David's counterattack came 3 days later, and it was exactly as pathetic as I'd expected. He returned to the house while I was at work, using his key to let himself in. I knew because my security system sent alerts to my phone every time a door opened. I found him in my home office when I got home, rifling through filing cabinets with the desperate efficiency of a man running out of options. Looking for something specific? I asked from the doorway. He spun around, guilt and anger warring on his face. This is still my house too, Clara. I have a right to be here. Actually, you don't. The prenuptial agreement specifies that this house, purchased with my inheritance money, remains my separate property. You're trespassing. Our marriage isn't over yet. I still have rights. I walked over to my desk and calmly pulled out a legal document. These are divorce papers. I filed them this morning. You have 30 days to respond, and given the evidence of adultery and financial coercion, I doubt any lawyer will advise you to contest them. David's face went white as he scanned the papers. You can't divorce me for trying to help you manage your money. I can divorce you for adultery, which I have documented proof of. The financial manipulation is just additional evidence of bad faith in our marriage. Clara, please. I made mistakes, but I love you. We can work through this. The desperation in his voice was almost convincing. Almost. With therapy? Marriage counseling? Are you going to tell Amanda Richardson that our marriage is worth saving? His jaw tightened. Amanda is a complication, not a relationship. A complication who's carrying your child. We don't know for sure it's mine. I stared at him, genuinely amazed by his capacity for self-deception. David, do you hear yourself right now? You're standing in my office, having broken into my house after months of lying and cheating, trying to convince me that your pregnant mistress is just a complication. I know how it sounds, but I want to save our marriage. I want us to work. Why? Because you love me, or because you need my money? David was quiet for a long moment, and I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Both, he said finally. I won't pretend the financial security isn't important, but my feelings for you are real. Your feelings for my bank account are real, I corrected. Your feelings for me were always conditional on what I could provide for you and your family. That's not fair. What's not fair is spending 7 months lying to me while planning to steal my inheritance. David sank into my desk chair, suddenly looking defeated. So what now? You destroy my family's business? You ruin my reputation? You take everything and leave me with nothing? I don't have to take anything, David. You've already lost everything that mattered. The question is what you're going to do about Amanda and your child. What do you mean? I mean, she came to see me yesterday. She's pregnant, scared, and starting to realize that you're not the man she thought you were. What are you going to do about that? David was quiet for several minutes. I don't know, he admitted finally. Well, you'd better figure it out quickly, because unlike me, she doesn't have a prenuptial agreement protecting her from your family's financial problems. After he left, I called a locksmith to change all the locks, then poured myself a glass of wine and sat in my kitchen, marveling at how quiet the house felt. Not empty, peaceful. For the first time in months, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. My phone rang around 9 o'clock. Richard Hamilton's name appeared on the screen, and curiosity won over common sense. Clara, this is David's father. I think it's time you and I had a frank conversation. I'm listening. You've made your point. You caught us in a difficult situation and you've extracted your revenge. But continuing this path won't benefit anyone. I'm not seeking revenge. Richard, I'm protecting myself from people who tried to defraud me. We never intended to defraud you. We intended to help you manage assets you're not qualified to handle. Even now, even caught red-handed, he couldn't admit the truth. The Hamilton family's capacity for self-deception was truly remarkable. Richard, I said, your son is having a baby with another woman while trying to convince me our marriage is worth saving. Your family spent months manipulating me with fake affection. You personally researched my family's finances before David even proposed. What part of this sounds like help to you? We're facing bankruptcy because of your actions. You're facing bankruptcy because of your poor business decisions and fraudulent accounting practices. I'm just refusing to be your solution. The conversation continued for 20 minutes, with Richard alternating between threats and pleading. When he finally hung up, I realized something important. They still didn't understand what they'd done wrong. They saw themselves as entitled to my money, deserving of my trust, victims of my unreasonable expectations. Even facing financial ruin, they couldn't acknowledge the fundamental dishonesty of their actions. 3 days later, Amanda called with news I'd been expecting. David's gone, she said, her voice hollow. He packed his car and left town yesterday. His lawyer says he doesn't know where David went. I'm sorry, Amanda. His parents are saying the baby isn't his. They're claiming he never admitted paternity. I closed my eyes, feeling tired. David had done exactly what I'd predicted when his life fell apart. He'd simply disappeared to start over somewhere else, leaving everyone else to deal with the mess. What are you going to do? I asked. I don't know. My lawyer says if David doesn't come back voluntarily, they can issue warrants for child support, but that only works if they can find him. Amanda, you and your baby deserve better than this. I know, she whispered. I just wish I'd figured it out sooner. After we hung up, I sat in my quiet house, thinking about patterns and consequences. David would reinvent himself somewhere else with people who didn't know his history. His family would blame everyone but themselves for their problems and continue looking for new marks to exploit. And I would continue rebuilding my life, one decision at a time, guided by the wisdom that some people see you only as what you can give them, rather than who you really are. 6 months later, the divorce was finalized without drama. David never responded to the papers, never hired a lawyer, never came back to contest anything. His signature appeared on the final documents via overnight mail from a law office in Phoenix, suggesting he'd found somewhere warm to restart his life. I felt nothing when I signed the final papers, not sadness, not anger, not even relief, just closure. The Hamilton family's financial collapse had been swift and complete. Richard's investment firm was under investigation by both state and federal authorities for mismanagement of client funds. Margaret had been forced to sell most of her jewelry and designer wardrobe to pay basic living expenses. Jessica's boutique had closed, and she'd taken a job as a sales associate at a department store. They'd lost the family estate to creditors, their country club memberships had been revoked for unpaid dues, and their social circle had evaporated once word spread about their financial troubles. The once prestigious Hamilton name now carried whispers of scandal and failure. I felt no satisfaction in their downfall, just sadness for lives wasted on greed and appearances. My own life was taking shapes I'd never imagined possible. I'd returned to nonprofit work, but with a different perspective and significantly more resources. Using a portion of my inheritance, I'd established the Clara Morrison Foundation, focusing on financial literacy education for young women. You've created something remarkable, my therapist observed during one of our sessions. You've transformed your trauma into purpose. Therapy had been essential for processing everything I'd been through, learning to trust my instincts again, setting healthy boundaries, recognizing manipulation tactics, all skills I'd needed to develop after years of being gaslit by people I'd trusted. The Foundation's first major program was a series of workshops teaching women how to protect their assets and relationships, how to recognize financial abuse, and how to build independent financial security. We'd helped over 200 women in our first year. I'd also started dating again carefully, slowly, with clear boundaries. His name was Thomas, and he was a high school principal who volunteered at one of our financial literacy workshops. He was kind, genuine, interested in my work rather than my bank account. We'd been seeing each other for 4 months, and he still didn't know the full extent of my financial situation. He knew I'd inherited some money from my grandfather and had gone through a difficult divorce, but I hadn't shared the details. When I was ready, I would, but I wouldn't rush the process to accommodate someone else's timeline. I like that you're not trying to impress me with expensive gifts, he'd told me recently. So many people seem to think relationships are about what you can buy for each other. I'd smiled and suggested we cook dinner at my house instead of going to restaurants. Thomas was respecting my boundaries naturally, without pressure or manipulation. It was a revelation to be with someone who was genuinely interested in getting to know me as a person, rather than as an opportunity. My phone rang while I was reviewing grant applications at the foundation office. Amanda Richardson's name appeared on the screen, and I answered with genuine curiosity about how she was doing. "Clara, I hope it's okay that I'm calling. I got your number from the foundation website." "Of course, Amanda. How are you? How's the baby?" "She's wonderful, healthy and happy. I named her Clara." "Actually, I hope that's not weird." I felt unexpectedly touched. "That's not weird at all. It's an honor. I wanted to thank you again for the advice you gave me. Getting that lawyer was the best decision I ever made. We managed to establish paternity and child support before David disappeared completely. I'm glad it worked out. There's something else, though. Something I thought you should know. I heard from someone at David's old firm that there might be a federal investigation into the Hamilton family business. Something about client funds being misused. I wasn't entirely surprised. The kind of financial desperation that had driven their attempt to steal my inheritance suggested deeper problems with their business practices. "Are you involved in any of that?" Amanda asked. "Not directly. My divorce is completely separate from any business issues they might be facing." We talked for another few minutes about her daughter, her new job at a different accounting firm, and her plans for the future. Amanda sounded happier and more confident than she had during our previous conversations. After we hung up, I reflected on how differently our lives had evolved from that moment when David's deception was exposed. Amanda had found strength she didn't know she had and built a secure future for herself and her daughter. I'd learned to trust my instincts and create meaningful work from my painful experiences. David had simply run away from the consequences of his choices, probably telling himself that everyone else was to blame for his problems. That evening, Thomas and I cooked dinner together at my house, and I found myself wanting to share more of my story with him. Not because I needed his approval or validation, but because I trusted him enough to be more vulnerable. "Thomas," I said while we were washing dishes, "there are some things about my past that I'd like to tell you about. Some of it might surprise you." He set down the dish he was drying and gave me his full attention. "I'd like to hear whatever you want to share." For the first time in years, I was looking forward to being completely honest with someone about my experiences. Not because I needed their understanding, but because I wanted to share my authentic self with someone who'd earned that trust. "It's a long story," I warned him. "I have time," he said simply. And for the first time since my grandfather died, I felt truly ready to trust someone with the whole truth about who I was and what I'd survived. I told Thomas everything that night about David, about the Hamilton family, about the inheritance and the betrayal and the manipulation. I showed him some of the legal documents, the evidence my grandfather had compiled, even some of the newspaper clippings about the Hamilton family's financial troubles. Thomas listened without judgment, asked thoughtful questions, and never once suggested that I should have handled things differently. "Your grandfather sounds like he was an amazing man," he said when I finished the story. "He was. He protected me even after he was gone. And you protected yourself. That's what impresses me most about this story. You trusted your instincts and fought back when people tried to use you." 3 months later, our quiet dinner was interrupted by a phone call that brought my past crashing back into the present. "Mrs. Hamilton, this is Agent Sarah Chen with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. I apologize for calling so late, but we need to discuss some urgent matters regarding your former husband's family business." I felt Thomas's hand squeeze mine reassuringly as I answered. "What can I help you with?" "Agent Chen, we'd like to ask you some questions about Hamilton Investment Group. Are you available to meet tomorrow morning?" The FBI office was exactly what you'd expect: fluorescent lights, bland furniture, and agents who looked like they'd stepped out of a procedural drama. Agent Chen and her partner, Agent Rodriguez, led me into a conference room with files stacked 3 feet high. "Mrs. Hamilton," Agent Chen began, "how familiar are you with your former husband's family business operations?" "Not very. David kept me out of business discussions, and I was never involved in the firm in any capacity." "Were you aware that Hamilton Investment Group has been under federal investigation for securities fraud?" I nearly choked on my coffee. "Securities fraud?" "For the past 2 years, we've been investigating allegations that the firm was running a Ponzi scheme, using new investor funds to pay returns to existing clients while siphoning money for personal expenses." Agent Rodriguez leaned forward. "The scope is significant. Over $60 million in fraudulent transactions, affecting nearly 300 investors. Your name appears on several corporate documents as a potential guarantor for business loans," Agent Chen explained, showing me photocopies. Did you ever sign authorization for your assets to be used as collateral? I studied the documents carefully. The signatures looked close to mine. But something was off about the letter formation. These are forged, I said immediately. I never signed these documents. We suspected as much based on the timeline and your divorce records, but we needed your confirmation. Over the next 3 hours, the agents explained the full scope of the Hamilton family's criminal enterprise. Richard had been stealing from client accounts for years, using increasingly desperate schemes to cover the losses. When traditional embezzlement wasn't enough, he'd started forging documents to use other people's assets as loan collateral. My inheritance had been their ultimate salvation plan, $23 million to pay back stolen funds and restart their operation with legitimate capital. When I'd refused to cooperate, Richard had resorted to forgery. The family is looking at significant federal charges, Agent Chen explained. Wire fraud, securities fraud, money laundering, identity theft. Richard and Margaret could face 25 years each. What about Jessica? She used her boutique to launder money from the scheme and helped create false documentation. She's looking at 10 to 15 years. And David? That's where we need your help. We have evidence that David was involved in the forgery scheme, but he disappeared before we could arrest him. We know he's been living in Arizona under an assumed name, but we need to locate him to serve federal warrants. I felt a strange mix of vindication and exhaustion. Vindication because my instincts had been right. These people were criminals who saw me as nothing more than an opportunity. Exhaustion because I was being pulled back into their chaos even after extracting myself from their lives. Will I need to testify? I asked. Almost certainly. Your testimony about the coercion attempts and your identification of the forged documents will be crucial for establishing their pattern of fraud. The trial began 8 months later, and sitting in that federal courthouse felt surreal. The Hamilton family looked diminished in their orange jumpsuits, stripped of the polish and sophistication that had once intimidated me. Richard had aged dramatically, his silver hair now completely white, his posture defeated. Margaret sat rigidly beside him, still trying to maintain her dignity even in federal prison clothing. Jessica looked younger somehow, like she'd finally stopped pretending to be someone she wasn't. David still hadn't been found, despite federal manhunts and media attention. He'd become a ghost, probably reinventing himself in some small town where nobody knew his history. I testified for 2 days, walking the jury through the systematic manipulation, the forged documents, the coercion attempts. The evidence was overwhelming: financial records, recorded phone calls, witness testimony from other victims. The defense tried to portray the family as desperate people who made bad choices under financial pressure. But the prosecution had documented years of deliberate fraud that went far beyond desperation. The verdict came back after 6 hours of deliberation. Guilty on all counts. Richard received 22 years. Margaret got 15 years and ordered to pay restitution to victims. Jessica received 8 years in community service. Walking out of that courthouse into bright spring sunshine, I felt like I was finally closing the last chapter of the Hamilton family saga. They would spend the next decades in federal prison, and their victims would receive some compensation from seized assets. But more importantly, I'd learned that my worth wasn't determined by other people's approval or greed. I'd discovered strength I didn't know I had, and built something meaningful from the wreckage of my marriage. That evening, Thomas met me at my house with takeout from my favorite restaurant and a bottle of wine. "How do you feel?" he asked as we sat in my kitchen. "Free," I said simply. Finally. Completely free. 2 years after the trial, I was standing in the community center that housed our foundation's newest program when my assistant handed me a phone message that made my blood run cold. "Mrs. Morrison, there's a David Hamilton calling for you, says it's urgent." David, after 3 years of hiding, of federal manhunts and assumed identities, he was calling me directly. I took the call in my private office, my hands surprisingly steady as I dialed the number. "Clara." His voice was older, wearier, stripped of the charm that had once captivated me. "Thank you for calling back. Where are you?" "David? That doesn't matter. I'm calling because I saw the news about the foundation, about the work you're doing. And I wanted to apologize. For everything. For the lies, the manipulation, the affair. For what my family put you through." I sat back in my chair, processing this conversation I'd never expected to have. "Why now, David? Why after all this time?" "Because I'm dying." The words hit me like a physical blow. Whatever I'd expected, it wasn't this. "I have pancreatic cancer," he continued. "Stage 4, maybe 3 months left if I'm lucky." "David, I'm sorry. I wouldn't wish that on anyone." "I know you wouldn't. That's why I had to call." You deserved better than what I gave you, Clara. You deserved honesty, respect, genuine love. Instead, I gave you lies and manipulation. I found myself crying, not from sadness, but from a complex mixture of grief for what might have been and relief that this conversation was finally happening. Why did you do it? I asked. Why couldn't you just love me for who I was? Because I didn't know who I was, he said quietly. I'd spent so long being what my family expected, what society expected, that I lost track of my own values. When I met you, you were so genuine, so authentic, and instead of learning from that, I tried to change you into someone who fit my family's expectations. And Amanda? Amanda was my attempt to feel in control of something when everything else was falling apart. It wasn't fair to her, and it certainly wasn't fair to you. We talked for over an hour, and for the first time in our relationship, David was completely honest with me. He told me about the pressure from his parents to find a wealthy wife, about his own insecurities and need for approval, about how the affair had started as an ego boost and spiraled into something he couldn't control. I want you to know that I've been following your work with the foundation, he said near the end of our conversation. You've helped so many women avoid what I put you through. That's something to be proud of. Thank you. Clara, can I ask you something? Are you happy? Really happy? I thought about Thomas, about the life we'd built together, about the foundation and the women we'd helped, about the peace I'd found in my own authentic self. Yes, I said honestly. I am. Good. You deserve that. David died 6 weeks later. Amanda called to tell me, her voice steady but sad. He came back east in his final weeks, she explained. He wanted to meet his daughter before he died, and he wanted to make sure she'd be taken care of. How is little Clara? She's wonderful. 3 years old and full of energy. David set up a trust fund for her education before he died. Not much, but enough to help. And you? I'm engaged. To a man who knew my whole story before he proposed, who loves Clara like she's his own daughter. We're getting married next month. After we hung up, I sat in my office thinking about second chances and the different paths our lives had taken. David had spent his final months trying to make amends for his failures. Amanda had found genuine love with someone who accepted her completely. I'd built a life based on my own values and found partnership with someone who respected my journey. That evening, I told Thomas about David's death and our final conversation. How do you feel about all of it? He asked, holding my hand across our kitchen table. Sad for the time we wasted, grateful for the lessons I learned, and peaceful about the life I've built since. Any regrets? I considered the question carefully. I regret the pain everyone went through, but I don't regret standing up for myself or protecting my inheritance. Those choices led me to the work I'm doing now, to this life with you. Thomas squeezed my hand. Your grandfather would be proud. I think he would be. 6 months later, Thomas proposed with a ring he'd designed himself simple. Elegant, nothing like the ostentatious diamond from David's family collection. When he asked me to marry him, he also asked if I'd be comfortable with a prenuptial agreement. Not because I don't trust you, he explained, but because I want you to always feel secure in your independence. I said yes to both the marriage and the prenup, understanding finally that real love seeks to protect rather than possess. Our wedding was small, attended by people who genuinely cared about both of us rather than what we represented or what they could gain from knowing us. Amanda and her new husband came, along with little Clara, who charmed everyone with her bright smile and boundless energy. Standing at the altar with Thomas, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed me had ultimately shown me my own strength. The people who'd tried to use me had taught me to value authenticity over appearances. Most importantly, I'd learned that my worth wasn't determined by what others could take from me, but by what I chose to build with the gifts I'd been given. 5 years later, I stood in the newest location of our foundation, watching women learn skills that would protect them from the kind of manipulation I'd experienced. The program had grown beyond anything I'd initially imagined. 12 cities. Thousands of women served. Partnerships with law schools and financial institutions. Mrs. Morrison, one of our program coordinators, approached me. The documentary crew is ready for your interview. The documentary about financial abuse in relationships was airing next month, and they'd wanted to include my story as an example of someone who'd successfully fought back against systematic manipulation. Sitting in front of the cameras, I reflected on how much had changed since that awful Sunday afternoon when I'd signed those papers in my living room. What would you tell someone who's in a similar situation to what you experienced? The interviewer asked. Trust your instincts, I said without hesitation. When people you're supposed to trust start making you doubt your own judgment, that's a red flag. When financial decisions become about power and control rather than partnership, that's abuse. What about forgiveness? Do you forgive the people who tried to defraud you? I thought about David's final phone call, about the Hamilton family in their prison uniforms, about the waste of human potential that greed and desperation had created. Forgiveness is a process, not an event, I said finally. I don't carry anger anymore, but I also don't pretend that what they did was acceptable. Some actions have consequences that can't be undone by apologies. Any final advice for our viewers? Your worth isn't determined by what others can take from you. It's determined by what you choose to build with the gifts you've been given. After the interview, I drove home to the house Thomas and I had bought together, a smaller place than my first home, but filled with genuine warmth and shared memories. Our daughter was playing in the backyard, her laughter carrying through the open windows. At 35, I was a different person than the naive young woman who'd married David Hamilton. I was stronger, wiser, more careful with my trust, but also more generous with my love for people who'd earned it. The inheritance my grandfather left me had been about more than money. It had been about the foundation for building a life based on my own values, my own choices, my own definition of success. Thomas found me in the kitchen preparing dinner and wrapped his arms around me from behind. "Good day?" he asked. "Perfect day," I replied, leaning back against him and watching our daughter through the window. "The foundation board called while you were out. They want to expand the program to international locations. What do you think?" "I think your grandfather would be amazed by what you've built." I thought about Grandpa Joe, about his foresight in protecting me from dangers I couldn't have imagined, about his faith in my ability to use his gift wisely. "He gave me more than money," I said quietly. "He gave me the tools to protect myself and the resources to help others do the same." That evening, after our daughter was asleep and the dishes were done, Thomas and I sat on our back porch watching the sunset. My phone buzzed with a text from Amanda. "Clara's first day of kindergarten. She says she wants to help women when she grows up, just like her namesake." The photo showed a bright-eyed little girl with a backpack bigger than she was, grinning at the camera with David's smile but none of his calculating charm. "Look at that," Thomas said, seeing the photo over my shoulder. "The next generation of strong women." I smiled, thinking about the ripple effects of the choices we make. The children who grow up watching us stand up for ourselves or learning to accept less than we deserve. "She'll never have to wonder if she's worthy of respect," I said. That's something. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories about turning betrayal into strength. And remember, sometimes the people who try to break you end up showing you exactly how unbreakable you really are. The inheritance my grandfather left me wasn't just money. It was the foundation for building a life based on my own values, my own choices, my own definition of success. It was the knowledge that my worth comes from within, not from what others think I can provide for them. And that inheritance is worth more than $23 million. It's worth everything. Some betrayals destroy us. Others reveal strength we never knew we had. The difference is in how we choose to respond when we discover who people really are behind their masks. I chose to build something better from the ashes of what they tried to burn down. And that choice changed everything.